All right, so today we are going to break down a really fiery speech from Representative Jim Jordan. His whole argument? That the recent intense focus on Jeffrey Epstein isn't really about justice at all. Nope, he calls it a politically motivated charade. So we're going to pull apart his argument piece by piece and see exactly how he builds his case.
You can just feel the intensity in that quote, right? The speech was immediately framed as this huge confrontation. And Jordan's argument, well, it wasn't presented as some simple policy debate. Not at all. It was positioned as a total unmasking of a political strategy. So that begs the question, what is this charade he's talking about? Okay, so the entire foundation of Jordan's argument, it's all built on this one central accusation that all this renewed attention on Jeffrey Epstein, it's not really about justice. It's about politics. Let's take a look at how he actually frames that.
And boom, there it is. That's the heart of his entire speech. He's basically saying that this intense focus on Epstein from Democrats isn't some genuine search for the truth. He's arguing it's a carefully calculated political weapon, and it's aimed squarely at one person, former President Donald Trump. According to Jordan, that's the main, maybe even the only, reason for all of this.
But here's where his argument gets really interesting. He doesn't just say this is happening now in a vacuum. No, he argues this isn't some new tactic. He frames it as just the latest chapter in a much, much bigger story. A political campaign, he says, has been going on for a decade. So to back up such a big claim, Jordan knows he can't just talk about today. He has to go back in time. He lays out what he calls a historical pattern of attacks, basically building this whole narrative of relentless, nonstop opposition. And this quote right here, this is really the anchor for that entire historical argument. He uses this idea of a constant to frame a whole bunch of different events, not as separate political fights, but as, interconnected pieces of one single long-running obsession. And here is the timeline he lays out to connect those dots. He kicks things off with allegations of spying on the campaign way back in 2016. From there, he draws a straight line right through the Mueller investigation, then impeachment 1, then impeachment 2, through what he calls lawfare and the Jack Smith investigations, all the way to right now, with the focus on Epstein. In his version of events, these aren't isolated incidents. They're all part of one long, unbroken chain of political attacks. Okay, so after setting up that whole historical backdrop, Jordan pivots to what he presents as his key piece of evidence for this charade happening right now. It all comes down to a specific redacted email. This is basically his smoking gun. So the focus is on this one email between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And the key detail he zooms in on is this. When Democrats on the Oversight Committee released the email, a victim's name was blacked out. Now, you might hear that and think, okay, that sounds pretty standard, right? Protecting a victim's privacy. But Jordan argues it was anything but. So why was it suspicious? Well, Jordan argues the redaction just doesn't add up. He lays out a few key reasons. First, he says the victim had already gone public with her story. On top of that, he claims no court had ordered her name to be redacted. No government agency had done it. Not even the Epstein estate had asked for it to be hidden. So all of this leads to the million-dollar question, the one that's really at the heart of his whole speech. If there was no obvious legal reason, no privacy concern, then why black out her name? What was the real motive here, according to him? And here's his answer. Jordan alleges that the name was blacked out for one simple reason, because that very same person had testified under oath that she never saw any wrongdoing by President Trump. So his argument is that her identity was hidden specifically to manipulate the narrative, to keep evidence that cleared Trump out of the public eye. Okay, so why? Why would his opponents go to such lengths? Well, Jordan doesn't just lay out what he thinks happened, he also offers an explanation for why it happened. He frames it as a kind of political sickness, something he calls the syndrome. So what is this syndrome? Well, he basically defines it as a deep-seated obsession on the political left. In his telling, it's not just a strategy, it's more like a compulsion to just go after President Trump no matter what, regardless of the facts. But then you have to ask, what does he think is causing all this? Well, according to Jordan, this whole obsession is a direct reaction to the policy successes of the Trump administration. He's arguing that all this relentless opposition is basically fueled by things like tax cuts, what he calls border security, and achievements in foreign policy. That's the connection he makes. So after spending all this time deconstructing what he sees as a totally politically motivated process,
You'd think you know how he's going to vote, right? But this is where he brings his speech to a pretty surprising conclusion. And this is the crucial part. Despite his entire speech just ripping into the Democrats' motives, he makes a point to separate the process from the principle. He makes it really clear that he still supports the main goal of the resolution itself, which is holding people accountable, and that he was actually going to vote for it. And that yes vote becomes his final pivot. He essentially uses it as a bridge to a much broader call to action. He's saying, look, let's vote yes on this, and then let's immediately get back to focusing on what American families actually elected us to do, like the economy and security. So what does all this really tell us? Well, Jordan's speech is a masterclass in how political narratives get built. By linking together this whole series of events, he reframes the current Epstein focus. It's not a search for justice in his telling, but the final act in a long political war. And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? When we hear a compelling story like this from any side, how do we, or can't we, separate the powerful political narrative from the actual, verifiable facts on the ground?